The relentless Wyoming wind howled across the basin, a living thing that clawed at the sagebrush and whispered ancient secrets to the dust. The year was 1887, and the town of Silver Springs sat like a tenacious barnacle on the vast ocean of the frontier. It was a place where hope often dried up faster than the creek beds in August, a collection of weathered timber and grit huddled against the imposing backdrop of the Granite Mountains. Main Street was a rutted scar of earth, flanked by the holy trinity of frontier existence: the Golden Spur Saloon, Henderson's Mercantile, and the auction block. It was here that civilization tried to assert itself against the wild, usually failing. Elias Thorne stood on the veranda of the Golden Spur, his boot resting on the railing as he surveyed the town that feared and respected him in equal measure. At 36, Elias was the master of the Ironwood Ranch, a sprawling empire of cattle and grass that dissolved into the horizon. He was a man chiseled from the landscape itself, rugged, unyielding, with eyes the color of gunmetal and a silence that spoke louder than most men's shouting. He had built Ironwood from nothing but a land claim and sheer will, burying his softness along with his parents in the hard earth years ago. "Another auction, Elias," grunted Sam Caldwell, his foreman and only true confidant. Sam spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust, his face a roadmap of wrinkles earned under the harsh sun. "Heard tell there's a mystery in the lot today." Elias swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching the light catch the whiskey. The autumn auctions were a grim necessity in Silver Springs, a marketplace where widows, destitutes, and the abandoned traded their freedom for survival. It was a practice that curdled Elias's blood, though he kept his face an impassive mask. In the West, survival was the only religion that mattered. "Who is she?" Elias asked, his voice a low rumble. "No one knows," Sam replied, squinting at the gathering crowd. "Rolled in on the stage from the east 2 days back, draped in black from crown to heel. Folk are calling her the Shadow Widow. Ain't nobody seen an inch of her skin." Below them, the town buzzed with a predatory energy. Men were placing bets, their laughter crude and sharp. Elias had never partaken in these auctions. His ranch ran with military precision. His bed was warm when he chose for it to be, and he viewed a wife as a complication he could not afford. "Strange thing, though," Sam murmured, leaning closer. "Mrs. Higgins at the boarding house said she heard the woman weeping last night. Not a whimper, mind you, but a sound like something breaking deep inside, like a wolf caught in a trap, knowing the hunter is coming." Elias shifted, the description striking a discordant chord in his chest. He knew that sound. He had heard it in the trenches of the war, the sound of men realizing that God had left the building. "Right then, gather round." The booming voice of Judge Silas Sterling cut through the chatter. The magistrate stood on the raised platform, his belly straining against his waistcoat. "Let us commence with these proceedings. We have 5 souls seeking Christian homes and honest work." Elias watched with detached cynicism as the first few women were paraded. He knew their stories. The frontier was small. Sarah, whose husband died in a collapse. Young Annie, barely out of childhood and already worn thin by the wind. Then she appeared. The Shadow Widow stepped onto the platform, and the crowd's murmur died instantly. She was different. Where the others slouched in shame, she stood with a spine of steel. She was draped in layers of heavy black crepe that swallowed the light. A thick veil obscured her face entirely, and black kid gloves covered her hands. She did not fidget. She stood like an obsidian statue, an anomaly in the dust. "Gentlemen," Judge Sterling announced, his usual bluster dampened by the woman's eerie presence, "we have here a widow of education and refinement. She reads, writes, and keeps a home. She has requested her name be withheld until arrangements are concluded." "What's she hiding?" a heckler shouted from the back. "Is she scarred? Diseased? Maybe she's ugly as sin," another cried, sparking a ripple of nervous laughter. Elias found himself descending the stairs of the saloon, drawn by a magnetic pull he couldn't articulate. He pushed through the press of bodies, the scent of unwashed men and horses filling his nose. When he reached the front, he looked up. The woman's head tilted slightly. Through the heavy veil, he felt the weight of her gaze. It was heavy, judgmental, and terrified. "Bidding starts at $20, the judge stammered. Silence. The men of Silver Springs were superstitious, and this woman looked too much like a specter of death. 10, the judge tried, sweating. Hey, Thorne. The voice grated on Elias's nerves. Caleb Reed, a gambler with more money than sense and a mean streak a mile wide, swaggered forward. He was flanked by his usual sycophants. I got a wager for you, king of the cattle, Caleb sneered, drunk on cheap gin and bravado. I bet you $100 you can't get that crow to show her face. Hell, I'll make it $300 if you can get her to warm your bed by sunrise. The crowd erupted. On the platform, the woman in black took a single sharp step back. You're drunk, Reed, Elias said, his voice cutting through the noise like a whip. Maybe, Caleb grinned, showing yellowed teeth. But my money is gold. Unless Elias Thorne is afraid of a little ghost story, or maybe you've lost your touch. It was a trap. Elias knew it. His rational mind screamed to walk away, to get back on his horse and ride to the sanity of Ironwood. But pride was a difficult beast to strangle. The town was watching. Make it 500, Elias heard himself say, his voice cold as winter iron. And you have a bet. Caleb's eyes widened, then gleamed with greed. Done. Elias turned to the judge. $50 for the woman. 50? The judge blinked. Going once, twice, 100. A new voice. It was Mercer, the wealthy merchant who collected wives like the porcelain dolls. Elias didn't blink. 150. 200, Mercer countered, sweating now. The crowd gasped. $200 could buy a small herd. 300, Elias said, locking eyes with the veiled figure. Mercer threw up his hands in disgust. Take her, Thorne. She's probably a hag anyway. Sold to Elias Thorne for $300. The gavel banged down like a gunshot. Elias stepped up to the platform. The woman stood frozen. He offered his hand. Ma'am, if you'll come with me. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then, a gloved hand, trembling violently, placed itself in his. My name, she whispered, her voice rough with disuse, is Ilara Vance. The journey to Ironwood Ranch was suffocated by silence. The wagon creaked over the ruts, the only sound accompanying the rhythmic thud of hooves. Elias glanced sideways at his purchase. Ilara sat rigid, clutching her skirts, a void in the landscape. You paid a king's ransom, she finally spoke, her voice muffled by the veil. Why? Pride, Elias answered honestly. And a wager. I heard, she said, a bitter edge slicing through her tone. Men and their games. You bought a mystery, Mr. Thorne. Do you fear what you will find when you unwrap it? I fear nothing on this earth, Mrs. Vance, Elias lied. They arrived at Ironwood as the sun began to bleed into the western peaks, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and crimson. The main house was a fortress of timber and stone, built to withstand sieges of both weather and men. Rosa, the ranch's matriarchal housekeeper, met them at the door. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of the veiled woman, but she said nothing, sensing the tension radiating off Elias. Show her to the blue room, Elias ordered. She'll dine alone tonight. That night, Elias sat in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. Above him, he heard the floorboards creak, pacing. She was pacing like a caged panther. He thought of the bet, of Caleb Reed's smirk, and felt a surge of self-loathing. He had treated a human being like livestock to settle a score. At midnight, a soft knock rattled his door. Enter, Elias called. Ilara slipped inside. She was still fully cloaked in black. The lamplight cast long, dancing shadows against the walls. I will not be the subject of a game, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. You won your bet. You want to see? Ilara, you don't have to. I insist. Her hands moved to the pins at her throat. I want you to see what $300 bought you. I want you to see why I hide. She unfastened the heavy crepe, then the inner veil. Finally, she reached up and removed a coarse, ill-fitting wig. Elias stopped breathing. The left side of her face was a ruin. A landscape of puckered, shiny scar tissue ran from her temple, across her cheek, and down her neck. It had claimed her ear and much of her hair on that side, leaving patches of scalp visible. But the right side was heartbreakingly beautiful. A high cheekbone, a jawline of porcelain delicacy, and an eye of storm gray that blazed with defiance. 14 months ago, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "My husband ran a newspaper in Kansas. He wrote against the railroad expansion, against the corruption. They came at night. They barred the doors and set the house on fire. My husband, my son." Her voice broke, then hardened. "I survived. The town looked at me with horror. I was a monster, a reminder of their cowardice. So I left." She stood tall, the lamplight harsh on her scars. "Well, Mr. Thorne, have you got your money's worth? Or shall I pack my bags and sleep in the barn?" Elias stood slowly. He walked around the desk, stopping inches from her. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He looked directly into her eyes. "The men who did this," Elias said, his voice a low growl, "are the monsters, not you." Ilara stared at him, waiting for the revulsion, the pity. "You are safe here, Ilara," he continued. "Ironwood is a fortress, and as for the bet, Caleb Reed can go to hell. I will pay him and tell him I lost. Your face is your own business." For the first time, the steel in her spine snapped. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Elias hesitated, then placed a tentative hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Weeks turned into a month. A fragile rhythm developed at Ironwood. Ilara stopped wearing the heavy veils on the ranch, though she wore a bonnet pulled low when outside. She took over the neglected garden, coaxing life from the stubborn soil with a desperation that mirrored her own need for rebirth. One afternoon, Elias was working a colt in the round pen when he heard a shout. "Snake! Rattler in the feed bin!" It was young Pete, a ranch hand with more freckles than sense. Elias dropped his rope and ran, but Ilara was already there. She held a garden hoe with a grip that turned her knuckles white. As Elias rounded the corner, he saw her flip the lid of the bin. The buzz of the rattle was deafening. Without a flicker of hesitation, Ilara struck. It was a precise, brutal motion. She severed the snake's head clean off. She turned, chest heaving, to find the ranch hands staring at her, mouths agape. "Always check with a stick," she said flatly, wiping the hoe on the grass. "Kansas taught me that much." Elias watched her, a newfound respect blooming in his chest. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor. That evening, he found her on the porch, watching the sunset. "You handled that well," he said. "It was just a snake," she shrugged. "Snakes are honest. They warn you before they strike. Men are rarely so courteous." "Ilara," Elias started, feeling the weight of the words. "I'm riding out to the north pasture tomorrow. The drought is drying up the creek. I'd like you to come." She looked at him, surprise flickering in her good eye. "I have no riding clothes." "Rosa can fix that." The next day she rode beside him in a pair of cut-down trousers and a wide-brimmed hat. They rode for miles, the silence between them no longer heavy, but companionable. They spoke of cattle, of the weather, of the land. She had a sharp mind, understanding numbers and logistics better than his foreman. "You're good at this," Elias noted as she pointed out a wash that would make a natural corral. "I kept the books for the paper," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "I love the ink, the smell of it. Words have power, Elias. They can build empires or burn them down." "Like fire," he murmured. "Yes," she whispered, "like fire." Their peace was shattered a week later. A rider galloped into the yard, his horse frothing. "Sheriff's dead," the man screamed. "Riders coming from the south. They hit the Miller place, burned it to the ground, killed everyone." Ilara dropped the basket of vegetables she was holding. Her face went ashen. "Who?" Elias demanded, grabbing the man's reins. "Gang of 6. Leader has a scar from his ear to his chin. Calls himself Silas Vane." Ilara let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "He found me." Elias turned to her. "You know him?" "He's the one," she whispered, terror dilating her pupils. "The one who lit the match in Kansas. He told me he'd finish the job one day. He enjoys the hunt." Elias's face hardened into granite. "Sam, ring the bell. Get every man armed. Board up the windows. Fill the troughs with water." "Elias," Ilara grabbed his arm. "He'll burn the ranch. He wants me. I have to leave." "You aren't going anywhere," Elias said, grabbing her shoulders. "You are under my protection, and I don't give up what's mine." The word hung in the air between them. Mine. The attack came at moonrise. They rode in like demons, torches blazing, but Ironwood was ready. Elias had positioned men on the roofs and in the barn lofts. When the first torch was thrown, a volley of rifle fire met it. The night exploded into chaos. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Elias was everywhere, directing fire, shouting orders. But Vane's men were seasoned killers. They pushed forward, using the smoke as cover. Ilara was in the main house, holding a Winchester rifle. She wasn't hiding in the cellar, she was at the window. When a man tried to breach the porch, she fired. The kick of the rifle bruised her shoulder, but the man fell. "Flank them!" Elias roared from the yard. He saw Vane, a towering figure on a black horse, directing his men toward the house. Elias broke cover, sprinting across the open yard to intercept him. "Vane!" Elias shouted, firing his Colt. Vane turned, laughing. He raised his own weapon. They fired simultaneously. Elias felt a hammer blow to his side. He spun, hitting the dirt. Vane's horse reared, spooked, but the outlaw stayed mounted, turning to finish Elias off. A shot rang out from the house. Precise. Deadly. Vane's hat flew off. He cursed, looking at the window where Ilara stood, smoke curling from her barrel. "Retreat!" Vane screamed, realizing the surprise was lost and the resistance too stiff. The gang wheeled their horses and vanished into the dark, leaving two of their own dead in the dust. Elias tried to stand, but the world tilted. Strong hands were suddenly there. Ilara. She was tearing at his shirt, pressing a cloth to the bleeding wound in his side. "You fool!" she was crying, her tears falling onto his face. "You stubborn, impossible fool!" "Did we get him?" Elias rasped. "He ran," she said, stroking his forehead. "But you're alive. Stay with me, Elias. Stay with me." The recovery was slow. For 3 weeks, Ilara didn't leave his side. She changed his bandages, fed him broth, and read to him from the few books in the house. The intimacy of the sick room stripped away the last of their defenses. One night, as the fever finally broke, Elias watched her dozing in the chair beside his bed. The firelight danced on her scars. He realized, with a jolt of clarity that stopped his heart, that he loved her. Not despite the scars, but because of the fire that had forged her. But peace was a fleeting illusion. News came from town. Vane hadn't left the territory. He was gathering more men. He was holed up in the abandoned Black Creek mine, waiting, taunting. Ilara disappeared the next morning. She left a note on Elias's pillow. "I will not let ironwood burn for me. I am finishing this." "Damn it!" Elias roared, ignoring the pain in his side as he pulled on his boots. "Sam, saddle the horses!" They rode hard, punishing the animals. The Black Creek mine was a labyrinth of rotting timber and dark shafts 20 miles north. When Elias and his men arrived, the gunfight had already begun. Ilara had ridden straight into the lion's den. She had positioned herself on a ridge, pinning Vane and his men down with rifle fire, but they were flanking her. Elias didn't wait for a plan. "Charge them!" The element of surprise was absolute. Ironwood's riders thundered into the camp, caught in a crossfire between the ranch hands and Ilara on the ridge. Elias saw Vane scrambling up the rocks toward Ilara's position. He spurred his horse, leaping off while the animal was still moving. He scrambled up the shale, his wound screaming in protest. He reached the ridge just as Vane cornered Ilara. Her rifle was empty. She held a hunting knife, backed against a cliff drop. "Now you burn," Vane hissed, striking a match. "No!" Elias tackled Vane. They rolled near the edge, grappling. Vane was strong, but Elias was fueled by a rage that transcended pain. He pinned Vane's arm, punching him hard in the jaw. Vane kicked Elias in his wounded side. Elias gasped, his grip loosening. Vane scrambled for his gun. A shadow fell over them. Ilara stood there, holding a heavy rock. With a primal scream, she brought it down on Vane's head. The outlaw crumpled. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by the wind. Elias rolled onto his back, gasping. Ilara dropped the rock and fell to her knees beside him. She checked his wound, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "I told you," Elias wheezed, grabbing her hand. "You are mine to protect." "And you are mine," she sobbed, collapsing against his chest. "You stubborn mule." Spring arrived in Wyoming with a riot of wildflowers. The snowmelt turned the creeks into rushing rivers, and the valley turned a vibrant, impossible green. The town of Silver Springs had changed. The story of the Shadow Widow and the Cattle King had become legend. When Alara rode into town now, scars exposed to the sun, men tipped their hats, not out of pity, but out of respect. She was the woman who had faced down Silas Vane. On the porch of Ironwood, Elias watched Alara tending to her roses. Against all odds, the red climbers had taken root, splashing vivid color against the weathered wood of the house. Elias walked down the steps, his limp barely noticeable now. He held a small velvet box in his hand. "Alara," he said. She turned, smiling. The sun caught her profile, and to Elias, she was the most breathtaking thing in the creation. "The roses are blooming," she said. "They are," he agreed. He took a breath, his heart hammering harder than it ever had in a gunfight. "Alara, the auction contract. It expires next week. You are free. You can go back east. You can go anywhere." Her smile faded. "Is that what you want? For me to go?" "No," Elias said, dropping to one knee in the dirt. "I want you to stay, not as a widow I bought, not as a housekeeper, but as my wife, my partner, the mistress of Ironwood." He opened the box. Inside sat a ring of white gold, set with a sapphire as deep as the twilight sky. "I love you, Alara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Scars, shadows, and all. Marry me?" Tears spilled from her eyes, tracking through the landscape of her face. "You realize I'm trouble, Elias Thorne? I attract fire." "Then let it burn," Elias smiled. "We're fireproof." "Yes," she whispered, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes." The wedding was the largest Silver Springs had ever seen. The entire town turned out. There were no veils that day. Alara wore blue, her face turned proudly toward the sun. When they danced, the floorboards of the Golden Spur shook with the stomping of boots and the clapping of hands. As the night wound down, Elias and Alara stood on the balcony, watching the moon rise over the mountains. "We made it," Alara said softly, leaning into him. "We're just getting started," Elias replied, wrapping his arms around her. Below them, the town slept, safer than it had ever been. And out at Ironwood, the roses continued to climb, thorns and blossoms intertwined, strong, beautiful, and enduring. Did this story of redemption and rugged love capture your imagination? Subscribe to our channel for more epic tales from the American frontier. Share this story with a friend who loves a good romance with a side of danger. Comment below. If you were Alara, would you have forgiven the town or left forever? I want to hear your thoughts. Thank you for reading, and may your own fences always be strong and your powder dry.